and I'm one of the co hosts for the podcast Through Their Eyes. Today, we're going to be interviewing a wonderful person named Pooja, who is an author, and we're going to be discussing when faith turns into fear. But before we do that, I'm going to let my wonderful co host Emily introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. As some of you may know, my name is Emily, and I'm one of the co-hosts at Through Their Eyes. And I just want to preface this episode by saying this is going to be one of my final episodes. Well, my final episode. You guys won't be seeing my face for a while. I may be coming back then and every like then and now, but for now, I'm going to be handing the podcast over to Unvi, full creative control. But just wanted to say that. I'm very excited to get into today's episode because we're going to be discussing religious trauma, which I think is a topic that a lot of people are afraid to talk about. And Pooja is a very courageous woman who has spoken about her experience, and we'll be talking about her experience today. So I'm going to hand over the spotlight to Pooja and go ahead and introduce yourself. And yeah, give us all the information that we need to know.
Thank you so much, Anvi and Emily. Thank you for having me on this show. My name is Pooja Chilukuri. I'm an author, a speaker, and I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner. I live in the Raleigh-Durham area. I'm originally from India, and I'm here today to share my story.
So, to first preface this, not to preface this, but to basically ask, could you basically give us a rundown of, how you got to America and how you really got into, the Christian faith and how that impacted your life?
Thank you so much, Anvi. Yes, I'm happy to share that. I grew up in India, so the first 19 years of my life I spent in India. And I grew up Hindu, so I was born into Hinduism. And I think a lot of times it's that way, right? Whatever religion you're born into and your parents are practicing and all the people around you are practicing, that just becomes your way of life. So for me, for the first 19 years, that's what I did. And when I was growing up, there was a big temple inside my home. And I was introduced to like these deities. There were so many of them. And every morning I woke up for school. It wasn't an alarm clock that woke me up. It was literally the sound of these temple bells. So that's a very beautiful part of my core memory from that faith. And then what happened was, as I was going along in life, I just realized that even within Hinduism, like I always used to think as a child, why can't we just talk to God? Why do we need all these hoops that we have to jump through, to get to God? And the people around me, they were practicing Hinduism. Like part of it was fun and festivals and all these things we did as a community. So, it was a way of life for us. But then there was also this other part where these deities had to be pleased and the rituals had to be done in a perfect way. Or if something went wrong, we called the priest home and, then he would have to bless it and fix it. And if we didn't do that, then something bad would happen. So, on the one hand, we have all this fun and festivals, and on the other hand, there's so much fear that's also associated with this faith that I was practicing. And so I decided that for some time I wasn't going to think about it. I was really busy studying. So the women in my family were married very young. So 2021 was too late. So not many of my cousins or went to school for higher studies. And I was determined that I wanted to break that. And so I wanted to be a doctor or an engineer, something that, I could show my parents, hey, look, you invest in my education and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get a job. And I wanted to prove myself. So I started studying really hard. And I actually got into medical school in India because you can go to medical school straight after high school. And what ended up happening is during this time, I developed some really peculiar symptoms, which no one could diagnose. And I was, with the best of doctors. I had access to the best medical care because I was right there at this big city hospital as a student. And when that was going on, I had symptoms that I don't want to gross out anybody, but I was throwing up a lot and I wasted away skin and bones. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. There was a lot of depression. So my parents, they tried everything. Now, when I think back, my parents were younger than I am right now when they were going through all this. So I don't know how they did it. But So going back, my parents tried everything. So my dad, he was also very religious and spiritual as well. So, we tried to go to all these pilgrimages, these idols, these temples. We tried even like the Muslims. The Muslims have a mystical part of their faith, the Sufis. So we even went to like their graves. We had a shaman come home and pray over me. Like, so there was all these avenues we were trying for my healing. And then we also saw a psychiatrist because one of the doctors thought that maybe it's a mental health issue that's expressing itself in my body. And, I was on 7 different pills at one time, and all they did was make me sleepy, but I could never sleep. So, long story short, Anvi, to answer your question, my dad knew someone in the US, and they knew someone at Duke University, which is right around the corner. We're in Raleigh and Durham, right? And that person said that maybe if they could bring me over here and use me as a test case, I have so much new research going on, maybe they could find a cure. And that's when I came to the US. I came as a student, and I never was able to get in touch with this person. But my roommate noticed my symptoms, and my roommate and a few friends took me to a small local church. And so, to answer your question, that's how I got to the US. It was because of that illness. And then they took me to a church, and there were 2 or 3 people there, and they prayed for me, and I got healed. And that shocked me because, the prior to that, for 2 years, we've tried everything. So when I got healed like that, that was when I decided that I really needed to investigate this religion further. So that's how I came from Hinduism to Christianity.
How do you feel that vulnerability plays a role in these sort of situations? Because what came to mind for me and from what I've read in the past is that vulnerability is a huge component. Typically, people who are younger or ill or just like are in less fortunate situations, they are typically what is it? Focused on in these situations. I don't want to say like victimized. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but how do you feel that played a role? And then also how do you now looking back out of that situation rationalize what happened in terms of like your healing? Like how do you view it now as opposed to then? Those are my
Sure, sure. So I think that the healing part of it till this day, when I try to process what happened, I'm not sure. I feel like it was probably faith mixed with some interaction with the divine energy, right? God, source, universe, Jesus, angels, like whatever, however we understand this divine beingness. But to answer your question, Emily, I think that you're right. Because I got healed, I was also at that time vulnerable and open to whatever I was being taught and told in the context of the Christian faith that was being practiced by that group. Because I do recognize now that Christianity is a very vast religion and there are several denominations. So, and even within denominations, some people have healthy practices. And then this particular group, it didn't start out with any kind of toxic or unhealthy beliefs. They were very loving, very kind. I was alone in the US and I needed a family, and they were just like a whole ready made family for me, right? Like a surrogate family. But the vulnerability that was that I'm alone, I need help, these people are right here, they're supporting me, they were instrumental in my healing. So I kind of felt this loyalty for them. And so what ended up happening and was that I also felt some zeal for Jesus because I knew he had healed me because another part of my story is that I did hear his voice as a freshman in college. That was a very personal and private experience that had nothing to do with the church or the people. And because I'd heard that voice, and because I got healed, and because I was also alone in a foreign country, everything played together. And it made me really open to whatever these people were believing and what they were telling me was the right way to believe, and their doctrines and their dogma. And to make a long story really short, as time went by, I started getting like deeply conditioned to whatever the beliefs were. And I can talk about them, if we have time, because some of the beliefs were very bizarre to me. Like, if we were late for church, then you're betraying Jesus. Like, for example, like that's a belief they had. Or if you were not in church every time the doors were open, then you were not a faithful believer. or if the pastor's interpretation of scripture is not how you thought about the Bible, then you were backsliding and you could lose this whole promise of going to heaven or something. So there were all these little things that had crept in. And the part that was good was the people, the community. But the part that became very damaging for me later on was things like measuring by your performance, right? Measuring everything outwardly, like judgment, judgment, judgment. And then the voice of Jesus that I had heard shortly after my healing was very sweet and kind. But what this group was telling me, they would quote verses from the Bible, like out of context sometimes, and portray this image of God that was very damning, very harsh, very punitive, very demanding. So those are the kind of things that started eroding my psyche. And I learned this feeling of helplessness because I was depending on them from the beginning. And now I was being told that I have to depend on them for prayers to figure out what is God's will for my life. And that's a kind of a that's a very dangerous territory because you lose your ability to think critically. And now you have other people telling you what God's plan or God's will, and they will never tell you like, oh, this is God's will for you. It would be more subtle, like through prayers and through, interactions and what they thought about the situation. So I didn't realize, to answer your question, Emily, how vulnerable I was to being manipulated. And even as I say that, I still don't believe that the intention for these people was that, oh, we're going to manipulate this girl. I don't think that was their intention. I think they thought they were doing me a favor by teaching me the right way, that
Yeah.
this is the right path. And because they believed it.
Yeah.
So for them, they thought they were coming from a place of love. But it was very damaging to me personally because using scriptures to get me to do things that my soul was not agreeing for, that meant that I was betraying myself.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I have the book right now, and it's wonderful. Everyone, you should go and check this book out. Um, but as I'm, listening to Pooja talk, I'm also looking through the book, and I noticed that there's a lot of lines in here which are basically resonating with exactly what you're saying. But I did notice on chapter 14, it basically states how, you've lost a lot of your community members, and, as you said, you thought that they had no harm and you were genuinely trying to believe in them. But do you think this denial made it even harder to leave the community because you're in this new foreign place with absolutely like barely any contact with your parents, and as you said, these people are essentially your family. You have your kids here, you have your life here, you're married here, the church had your wedding, and through all of this community and staying here for, I believe it was 18 years, that's gotta be an extraordinarily difficult experience to leave. And so I guess my question, and building off of Emily's wonderful question, is how did you really deal with the community loss that you've, experienced after 18 years in a place that you called home? And honestly, that was the majority, if not all of your adulthood.
Thank you for that question, Anvi. Yeah, and I'll even preface that a little bit to just give you an idea of why I left. So I've been serving for 17 years, and I just really felt I served in the church, and my husband was serving too in a leadership and, teaching and choir and other things. So part of it was a physical burnout because the more we did, it seemed like more was expected. And this more that was expected, it wasn't so much that humans were expecting it, we were made to feel and believe that God was expecting more and more. And my husband had gotten sick with an autoimmune condition. And so we started hearing things like, because we were pulling back how much we were doing. And I remember this one church elder told us, because you're pulling back, that's where your husband is sick, like as if God is punishing us. So, there were all these different kinds of really scary messages that I was getting. And one day I remember going to church and there was a Bible study going on, and they were playing the video of somebody. It was some preacher, it was not our pastor, and this guy was saying, if you have a bad attitude, God is going to destroy you. And it was a whole lot of fear mongering, right? And something snapped in me, and that was the day that I had enough. And I came home and I said, you know what? I don't want to be a Christian. I don't want to go to church. I don't want to be religious. I want to be an atheist. Like I had it with religion because Hinduism too, when you go deep into it, as what the priests were saying, they were fear mongering also. So I was like, you know what? I'm done. And then I came home, and that's the day when I remember having like a nervous breakdown. And I felt like I had this experience with Jesus, which was very personal, which I felt a very kind presence, and if somebody touched me, and I felt this overwhelming sense of love. And the irony is, I hadn't felt that way about Jesus in a long time. Because in church, the Jesus that I was kind of forming in my mind was someone that I wanted to run away from. And so to have this experience in my closet, which I talk in great detail in the book, so I'm not going into the details right now, but when I had that experience, I realized that Jesus is very kind. And I thought, if I keep going to church, I'm going to lose whatever faith I have left. And I know that sounds kind of ironic, right? It kind of counterintuitive, but that's exactly why I left. I left to save my faith. I wanted to believe in Jesus, but I refused to believe it in the context that I was being given and told. And so
I
when I
think,
left, oh, sorry.
oh no, I was just going to say, I think that's a beautiful sentiment. And it's something that I thought of a lot, just that sort of dichotomy between church and then personal belief. Because I know you mentioned that you have this like personal, like these personal moments with like Jesus. And I think that's very interesting because the way that the way that I've come to conceptualize religion is that your relationship to God is unique and it's individual. And sometimes people worship in ways that may not be like extremely consistent, or they may not be like constantly going to church. Like people have their own sort of people have their own relationship with God. And I think that's allowed. And I think people should be allowed to nurture that relationship in the way that they see fit. Because I think with church sometimes like there's sort of like these issues of like hierarchy where like people feel the need to be like, oh well, I'm a better Christian than you, I'm better like this than you, and they sort of like use the rules that are set as sort of a way to weaponize them against other people. And it's sad because the way that I like personally see God, like I'm also a Christian, I'm Catholic, is that I've always felt that God was kind. I genuinely like do believe that. And I think it's so sad when people sort of use God or use like any sort of testament to like spew hatred or to make people feel bad about themselves, because that's not what it's supposed to be about. I've always felt that the whole point of faith is to have something beautiful and to like harness that. Like I've always like conceptualized it as, like God is love and we should always act in love. We should always treat each other with respect. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, but
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Yes, I totally believe that. It's been 15 years since I left, and I had 15 years to process my personal relationship with Jesus and God. And it's given me a much more universal picture of a much more universal God, because we tend to put God into our box and our tribes. And Anvi, to answer your question, when I left, the loss of community was significant, because one of the things that happens in a group, which is very, where you have leaders that are very controlling, you learn this dependence, you learn this helplessness. You feel like you cannot exist without them. So all those muscles I hadn't really developed. And plus, when we were leaving, we were also told that we're turning our backs on God's work. So God's wrath was going to come upon us. So imagine I'm going to leave this community. I'm going to be in a space where I have to figure things out on my own while having this fear that God would punish us, right? And I just look back and I just thank God that I had that presence of Jesus to sort of keep assuring me that it was going to be okay. It was going to be okay. But I think the first 2 or 3 years, I experienced a lot of depression and a lot of vacuum. Like, how do you fill like a whole space like that? You don't just get a new community overnight, right? Plus, I wanted to take my time. As you said, Emily, I didn't want to just go back to another church and then just play that same story out again. I really wanted to take the time to evaluate who I am, what I believed. And in the last 15 years, I found that I don't believe just one thing.
Mhm.
whatever resonates from different religions and different spirituality and different philosophies that resonates, I'm just collecting them like a treasure, like treasures in a chest. I'm
Definitely.
still,
But I just wanted to add and state that, like, right now, I think every single episode here and there, I'll always bring up, like, some type of history thing. Emily already knows about this, but right now we're learning about, in A Push, we're learning about, different colonies and their different religious beliefs and whatnot. And we're learning about how a lot of these places that had very low religious tolerance didn't really survive and they kind of like crumbled. And I think one thing with Hinduism that I feel like could relate to all religions is just the fact of flexibility. When you have a religion or you have a concept that can adapt and evolve, it will stand for longer. So I feel like, as you said, taking that meta-analysis of all those different religious beliefs, and then also those different like philosophical beliefs, I'm so sorry, and then like adding that together into making your own religion, but still taking a certain pathway. I think that's beautiful, and that's just what I wanted to butt in and say. But you can totally continue with what you were saying.
and
I
I
just want
just,
to say, oh, no, I
go
just want
ahead.
to
No,
say, I just, no, sorry. I just want to say I completely agree with Anvi. I think it's very beautiful that you're living your truth. Like, I feel like every person's experience is unique, and the way that you live life, you're entitled to because everyone's truth looks differently. We live life differently. And I'm glad that you're in a space where you feel more comfortable with yourself just because I've always felt that fear mongering in major religions is such a big component. And then in like small religious groups like that, it's like even more prevalent because you're so like close to your hearing like the same things over and over again. So it's just really drilled into your head. And I don't know, it's just it's scary because as a human being, like you want to mitigate fear. So because them saying, oh, like if you leave, this is going to happen, like naturally, that's terrifying. And you're like, okay, I'm going to stay put. But the fact that you're able to fight against that, like it takes a lot of strength, especially when you were put in that situation at such a young and impressionable age.
thank you. Thank you for saying that, Emily. It's been a very long road. It's the very ironic because while I was in the church, it was a lot of stress. I remember there were days I would get up in the morning and I would break out in hives, before going to church. And it took me a while to make that connection that my body was stressed. I knew I was entering a space that I didn't feel psychologically safe in, even though the people were never bad. Like when I say bad, actually, what I mean is they didn't mean any harm. They themselves were in it. Do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't never intentional on their part. And so, but I still didn't feel safe because I knew I would get judged a lot for not following everything the way that I was being asked to. And in the last 15 years, I've realized one thing, that all of us, all humans on earth, right, we're all these pieces of God, pieces that are individuated, right? Like, so each one of us is expressing God or source in our unique way. So the religion part, I think, is just something we need. I think we need it when we are, to me, it's like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, right? Like you're evolving, you're growing. But once we understand that love that unites all of us, religion at that point, I think then we may not need it as much, right? Because when you can find your connection, then religion becomes more about the community and being able to organize and do good works in the community.
Yeah, totally. And I also do have a question that, doesn't come from me, but it definitely comes from certain friends that I have that are Hindu, but also like friends that are like, Muslim and Catholic. And from your point of just stating, well, why do we really need religion if we can just love God? And I know for me, I believe in this being of the universe, whatever that may be. I don't consider myself agnostic, but I definitely consider myself to be someone who, consolidates a bunch of different beliefs. And so I think my question is, with these religions, all these different religions having that opportunity for people to really, seek their specific um self in their faith, why did you choose Christianity? Like, for example, if you're a Muslim, there's multitude of like a different schools that you could follow, and even you don't have to really follow a school. You can just follow the word of Allah. And then, if you're a Hindu, you can have the bhakti moment, which I think is maybe what happened with you and the whole trauma. Or, there's the other type where you just completely devote yourself to this karma. And then there's also the third option where you kind of analyze all of these stories. And I think it's the same way with Judaism and Christianity, where you can, like, read the Bible and really take word from that, or you can kind of just interpret the text. And so I guess to take all of that into account, why did you choose to stay with Christianity rather than abandoning, not abandoning necessarily, but by just instead of calling yourself a Christian, why wouldn't you call yourself just a person who believes?
Right, and I do that now. But when I was in the church, I did not have I didn't have the freedom to do that. Because if I did, then I would be deviating from the core beliefs. For them, it was like us versus them, right? So when you're Christian, you can't be anything else. Like that was the core belief within that group. And so that was not the freedom I had. That's part of what made it so much feel like a cult-like environment. Yeah. And but now I will gladly tell you I'm just a human being and I love God and I love people. And yeah, I have a lot of experiences with Jesus, but I'm not, everybody has their own. And that's made me more universal in my outlook, really. So, and I think mysticism, that's the other thing, right? All these mystical experiences that we're having, that you feel more connected, the more you have those experiencing, the less, you might need less of religious traditions, but I still think religion has value in that it brings people together. It does, Some of the most purposeful work I ever did was through that church. Because as a team, you could do so much more for the community. So.
I have a question before we switch over to our segments. I wanted to ask, how did sort of your evolution with this community look like? Like, I know you said at first you didn't, it was just very warm and welcoming, and then slowly, like, it sort of like devolved. And I'm curious because normally there's this thing in psychology. Here I go with psychology, but I forget what the proper term for it is, but normally the first impression that somebody or something makes on you sticks. So even if some later action sort of undoes that or sort of acts against that, it's very hard to sort of deviate from what you initially thought. Like you are stuck on that naturally. So I'm curious, was this like warmth sort of something that like you solely felt like within like the first few weeks, or was it something that sort of like devolved slowly through the years into something that you just weren't so glad with?
Thank you, Emily. That's a good question. No, the warmth and the love lasted a really long time, which is why I stayed for a really long time. But
Mm.
what started happening is I started awakening. Some of the things that I was hearing, and I'll give you a very classic example, right? If you're not a Christian and you don't have these exact beliefs that we're believing, then God is going to send you to hell. For the longest time, whatever it was, I was surrounded by all this love and the warmth. I kept believing it. And then came the awakening. What about my family? So many of them were not Christian. So then I had to really wrestle with that question, right? And when I'm wrestling with it, if I wrestle too long, then I am the one that's not being faithful. My faith is weak. How can I question what's already been laid out, right? Those kind of things. So it wasn't one thing, it was a series of many, many events which made me struggle with my own soul. And it made me struggle with my own questions. And one day I even thought to myself that the life I'm living is hypocrisy because after 10 or so years, and I started awakening and I started realizing that some of these beliefs were not making sense, but I was going along with it, right? So that means I'm not being authentic. Now my heart has changed, my mind has changed, but I'm still telling you I'm just like you, I think like you, right? And that's not true. And so my conscience started kicking in. Because every time I wanted to say no, I was saying yes. And that wasn't just to the beliefs, it was also to what was being asked of me, right? My time, my resources, what commitments, everything. And then my beliefs about Jesus started changing. And that was the final straw because I could lie about everything else, right? Like, okay, I'll believe this, this, this. but I couldn't lie about Jesus, you know, where I was experiencing him as a kind, like, how can I demean the character of someone like Emily? I cannot lie about you, right? You're a sweet, gentle soul. And, I can't just go around believing that you're harsh, punitive, and whatnot, right? So once I started experiencing Jesus and I started seeing that contrast, my conscience really kicked in. I was like, I cannot go along with this anymore. So
Thank you for the kind words, which I really appreciate it. And I just want to say, like, I am like shocked, and I can't imagine like what that cognitive dissonance feels like, just because it's so distressing to feel such a stark difference between what's inside versus what's going on outside. And like naturally, as human beings, we want to balance that. So yeah, I can't imagine like bodily how that feels. Like I know you mentioned like you would break out in hives, and that only goes to show how like intense that physical stress was, that it was like manifesting externally.
With all of that said and done, I think that we should move on to the Q&A segment.
So this one is called Am I the Asshole? I told my little sister if it were up to me, she would go to hell. My sister and I both were both raised in a household I'll tentatively call toxically Catholic. We were both raised in what I feel was a smothering amount of moral teachings and chastising around our family's religious beliefs. When I moved out and went to college, I rebelled against that sort of constriction and for a bit became pretty anti-religious. I honestly believe that organized religion was always used as an exploitative measure against people. During my last semester of college, I went to study abroad in Seoul and got to go to a temple and stay a while I was in South Korea. I absolutely fell in love with Korean Buddhism and its teachings and practices while I was there. It changed my mind on a lot of previous perceptions of organized religion and kind of reopened my mind to the idea as a whole. Keep in mind, I am not at all Buddhist or anything and would still consider myself generally agnostic. When I came back to my hometown after graduation and was telling my family some of the stories from my temple stay, my sister said something like, "It sucks you'll never see heaven now." She's always been a bit holier than thou. This was the most disrespectful thing she has ever said to me, and in front of our parents. I looked at her and said, if I were Jesus, people like you wouldn't even get a look at heaven. I admit it was definitely too far, especially while I was under my Catholic parents' roof, but I felt it was such a snide comment to make on something I was actually excited about and could have led to serious religious talks with my family. I feel like maybe I handled that situation too hastily.
Oh wow, that sounds very similar to what Pooja has been going through. So speaking of, would you like to, give your thoughts on that first before me and Emily do?
Yeah, I'm curious about your input.
So this is what led to my awakening, right? This whole thing, heaven and hell. So we were told that for years and years. I believed it, like I said, for the first 10 years, and I look back and I think, how could I have believed that? How? Some of the nicest, most sweetest people in my life, please don't tell me that God is gonna send them to hell just because they don't believe like you do, right? So this person's story, it really struck me what her sister said, because that wasn't her sister's judgment. That was what her sister, it was a learned judgment, right? That's what her sister had learned from her religion, from probably her parents, her environment. Um, that was the most difficult part of my belief, that I had to deconstruct and rebuild. And now have a completely different outlook on heaven and hell. But I won't take up the space here to talk about it, because I actually interview people on a podcast where people have died and they've left their bodies and they've seen things and they come back. And this whole concept of heaven and hell, if you understand it in a broader perspective, those are states that we create it with our intentions, our thoughts, but then, to leap from a physical heaven and hell where, half the world is going because they don't believe like you do, to this place where we understand that it's a state, that's a journey that's very individual, and every individual has to make that for themselves.
I think it's really interesting that you pointed out that her sister's words were taught, because the first phrase that comes to mind for me is that he is taught. Like I know it's like a very like generic phrase, but it's something that I hear a lot, and I think that's very interesting because I feel like naturally people aren't hateful. I think a lot of people are just born as blank slates, and I feel like that's why children are so naturally curious, and that's why they ask so many questions because they're just trying to familiarize themselves with the world around them. And naturally, like we are sponges, like as you were saying, these are things that are implemented into us. We're socialized in specific ways, and because of that, we repeat the things that we've like grown up with, and we tend to not question them because we grow sort of a sense of comfort around these beliefs, because to sort of feel like the foundation you've set your life upon is wrong is a scary thought, because then you think, okay, well, this is what I'm used to, this is the foundation that I'm standing on. If I were to break it, or if I were to question it, how am I going to find my footing then? So I think that's very interesting. And as for the sisters themselves, I'm of the belief that everybody's entitled to believe what they feel is right. I think that everybody has a sense of individuality, of course, because we're unique as human beings, and because of that, you're allowed to live your truth in whichever way you want, as long as it's kind and respectful and you're not hurting anyone. I don't see what's wrong with anything like that, but that's just the way that I've grown up. But I think a lot of hate sort of spews from just misconceptions because we fear what we don't understand, and then also just that sense of comfort. So I think, like you were saying, the sister, she's just spewing what she's been taught. Like she doesn't understand because she's been conditioned to think, oh, this is the other, this is like wrong. And like she doesn't have a personal understanding of it. Like I'm sure that sister, she doesn't have any friends who are Korean Buddhist, or she doesn't have friends that are Buddhist in general. And that's probably why she lacks understanding, because it's easier to hate something when you can't humanize it, when you can't like attach that title to somebody that you have like an affinity for. It's so easy to hate it. Like I feel like that's such a big thing in propaganda, where um when you're made to hate a certain group, like you are made to dehumanize them, so that way it's easier to feel this sense of malice, because when you empathize with somebody, you view them as human, you see them as that equal. So I think that detachment, like on top of misconception, like can sort of manifest as hatred, like especially when you've been conditioned with those beliefs. So
Yeah. I'm so sorry about that. My throat is like dying. I think everyone in North Carolina has a cold right now. But yeah, building on what Emily said, like she's totally quoting what certain points that she made from our previous episode where we talked about, nurture and nature, and y'all should check that out if you want to dive into that topic more. But I 100% agree with Emily. I think that building off what she said, I think religion was meant to be a societal thing in the beginning because you want to build a society and a group that will, do all these things and build all these things to ensure the survival of humanity. And I think that it had very pure intentions. It was like a way out of the metaphorical jungle that is life. But I think at some point, some people with maliciousness, they tainted the religion to be a very specific thing where you, as Emily said, dehumanize others, or you very much single them out. These people don't seem to be made of the same flesh and blood as you. They seem to be below you. And you can see it throughout history how certain people, they have this holier than thou perspective and personality that, the person was stating that their sister had. And I think that this lack of tolerance in religion, but also the manipulation that is being done in these religious communities, I think it really takes people away from really trying to find their pure faith and what will lead them to, that greater good, and more puts them in a place where, this is the way to live. And if you don't live this way, you are going to hell, or you are going to die, or you are not going to have a positive outlook. But what do you guys think on that? All of those things kept in mind.
Pooja, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll just say, Anvi, that there's a great truth in that, right? Fear can be a really powerful tool to let people stay stuck where they are, right? Fear paralyzes. It's a great tool if you want to control something or someone. So, Emily, I'll let you take.
No, I completely agree with that. I mean, we see fear tactics being used all throughout history, and it's such a common thing because, like you said, it paralyzes and people feel the need to stay put. And I think a lot of hatred is rooted in fear, just because people are, like I was saying before, they're scared of the unknown. Like if they can't understand something, like that's scary, especially when it's something that you've been conditioned to believe threatens your beliefs. So then you go on defense because you think, okay, I need to protect my beliefs. I need to stand my ground. I need to defend what I have been comfortable with, what I've grown up with. So I think that's a really big component of it. I think with hatred, I think it's such a complex emotion. Like I think a lot of people sort of simplify it as just strong disdain, but I feel like there's so many levels to it and there's so many factors because with a lot of I think with a lot of people who have sort of like a bigotry towards like religious groups or like any other sort of like groups, I think a lot of it just stems from misunderstanding. I think that's largely what it is. I think I generally think that like if people got to know somebody and like of a different group that they would grow sort of like an affinity towards them. Like let's say like they befriended somebody and then like of a different religion. And then um I think through that sort of like camaraderie, they would like that disdain would sort of like go away. Because like I was saying before, I think when you humanize people and when you come to understand things and realize they're not as threatening as they are, you're like, okay, this isn't so bad. I think a lot of hatred is really just misunderstanding and just fear combined, really.
Yeah, I think that when you put your feet in their shoes and you look through their eyes, maybe you'll find, them and their true personality that really goes beyond all of these, components that Emily was talking about. Um, I'm not sure if we have time for another or if we want to just let Pooja, give her final sentiments on, what exactly she'd like to tell people going through a similar situation or just like, about her religious experience and whatnot. So I'll let you guys decide.
Yeah, Pooja, if you have any other words before we move on to our next segment or any words of wisdom for this young woman, feel free.
Thank you, Emily and Anvi. One thing that I do want to say, if you find yourself in a group or a situation where you are feeling that you're not allowed to express your authentic self, that you're not able to leave because of either fear or those are your friends, and it doesn't have to be religion, right? It's always, it can be any group. You could be at work, it could be a friends group, it could be anywhere. I just would encourage you to just take that first step and start building relationships outside of that group and find people that can create safe spaces for you. If you need to talk to a therapist, talk to a therapist. Find people who validate you and your feelings and who help you, good friends, right? Who help you to do the right thing through everything. And by the right thing, I mean things that are going to be supportive of your growth and our pure authentic expression. So yeah, I wish I had done that. That's something I didn't do. I didn't build relationships outside the group, which is what and made leaving so hard. But if you find yourself that, and always, if you feel like you're getting like, and I will use the word addiction very loosely here, but for me, I was addicted to going to church on Sunday because if I didn't go, I had like these withdrawal symptoms, even when it was causing me stress. I felt guilty for not going. So watch for those flags. Like, are there groups and people that make you feel guilty? Do you feel obligated to like, say yes to everything? Like those little things, and just make room to breathe for yourself. So find those people, find your tribe, find those safe spaces, and build them. Work on it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Pooja. Truly, your story is very beautiful, and the way that you conceptualize things and have grown from this experience is like truly, truly admirable. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to be doing our media segment. So, like I said before, feel free to stay on. Our media segment is just when we talk about um, any media that we've been consuming recently. It can be any books that you've been reading, any shows that you've been watching, music that you've been listening to, videos that you've been watching, like anything that you would like to share, like in regards to that, you can feel free to share here. It's really just so that we can give recommendations, talk about things that we personally, things that have piqued our interest. And yeah, so. Shall I lead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I've been reading The Hunger Games. I've been really into that lately. I am on the third book now. I sort of blew through the first and second book. I absolutely love it. And I think last month was when I watched all of the movies because I was just so invested. But it has certainly turned into my favorite book series of all time. I genuinely think it is so well written. And the way that Suzanne Collins just is able to make like the way that she's able to sort of integrate such complex and sort of minute details is so beautiful. Just because it's so obvious that she's very well read. And I love that. And I love how even like small details they have significant meaning. And I love when projects or like movies or books are written in a way in which everything is done so thoughtfully and with so much care and tenderness. So that's really big for me. And then in terms of shows, a little bit more lighthearted, I've been watching Wednesday because I love the Addams Family. I've always loved the Addams Family. You guys might not know this about me, but when I was a kid, I was Wednesday for 3 years in a row for Halloween. And then the following 2 years, I was Morticia Addams. So I love the Addams Family, and that's I've been doing that as well, working that in there with my schedule. But yeah, those are the main things that I have been consuming lately and have been on my mind. But yeah.
Yeah. Pooja, would you like to go ahead and say your things if you have any like more?
Yes, sure. So the shows that I've been binge watching, I love murder mysteries. So I've been binge watching Midsummer Murders. There's 23 or 24 seasons, so I have plenty to watch. Plenty to watch.
Wow.
And and the book I'm reading has nothing to do with murders. I'm reading The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr, and it's a whole different take on Jesus, so it has my interest right now.
Have you read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, Abuja? Yeah,
Yes,
I was like, I
yes,
feel like you would love that. So I mean, it's a classic.
yes.
So I was
Yeah.
assuming you had, but oh my God, stop.
I have The Alchemist. I think we're all Alchemist like
Yes.
enjoyers. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. It's great.
Yeah. Um, I wanted to share that I've been reading more political books because that is my interest, and I've been reading Why We Can't Wait by Martin Luther King. And it's great. It's really awesome because you can see like his perspective on a multitude of like different things going on, but in the civil rights movement, and how the black man compares to the white man. There's a whole like lot of things that I feel like I'm gonna have to take an entire episode to describe. So I'm just gonna say that it is the winner of a Nobel Peace Prize. And it's written by Martin Luther King, so I think y'all should, give it a shot. It's a great book. I'm rereading it, so that's why that little part is, there. And then I'm also reading a multitude of these books, so I'm gonna go like really quick. This is Mice and Men of Mice
I
and Men.
have that.
It's a great book. This is The Catcher in the Rye. I
Love
love it.
it. I love
This
it.
is this is the best book ever. Man called Otto.
I think I've
Oh,
heard of that one.
and the books fell. Yeah,
You know what I think you
the
would
man.
really
Yeah,
love?
it's a really really good book.
You know what I think you'd love, Anvi? I feel like you'd
What?
really love this one book. It's called The Five People You Meet in Heaven. It's so good. I read it when I was I think I was like 12 when I read it. I read it a long time. I read it like 10 years ago. Yeah, because I'm gonna be 22 in like a month. But yeah, I read it like 10 years
Oh,
ago. It's such a good book. I love it. It's really nice because it really shows how even people that you just like barely brush paths with can have a huge impact on your life. And it sort of um ties into the whole idea that everything in your life means something and that everything plays a part in where you are going and where you have gone. And I think that's a really beautiful concept. So I think that's a great read. I feel like you'd really like that.
yeah, I'll totally check it out. There's also another book, and it's called A Short Stay in Hell. And I want to read it so bad. I think like the prospect is kind of like this guy, and he reads a book, and then he's in like this state of limbo, and he's trying to get his way out of there. I'm not too sure. I've heard about the book, and I'm like, this is awesome. I really want to read this. But yeah, those are just like some books. And then for music, I think we forgot the music aspects, but it's okay. I've been listening to a lot of Japanese breakfast, which is just like a random band. I know Pooja just gave me the face of like, what is that? But it's like this indie like pop type of band, and it's really cool. Right now I'm listening to like Posing for Cars, and then I'm also listening to
Mm,
Paprika. But yeah,
let's
so
see.
that's what I
What
have to give.
I've been listening to a lot of popular music. I love underground music though, and I love when bands have like super random names like that. Like I love it so much. Let's see. I really like the Backseat Lovers. They're a bit more popular now though, but I love them. When I was in high school, I loved them so much. But I've been listening to a lot of popular stuff recently, not gonna lie. So I can't really offer any low-key suggestions, but I've been listening to a lot of Somber and the Marias. So yeah, that's really what I've been listening to. And of course, Conan Gray. You guys know I love Conan Gray so much. I actually I actually am gonna go see him in concert in like 3 weeks.
Oh
So
wow,
I'm very excited about that. I'm very, very excited about that.
that's awesome.
Um, let's see what else I've been listening to. I have to check. Let's check my on repeat playlist on Spotify. Let's see what we're getting here. Yeah, we're getting a lot of Somber, a lot of Conan Gray, some SZA, the Marias, as I expected, some Hosier,
Oh wow.
and one Ariana Grande song. And then this one French song that I really like, and I can't pronounce the name.
What's the Ari song?
Dandelion.
Girl, okay. That is a nice one. Yeah. What about you, Pooja? What have you been listening to, if anything?
Yeah.
Okay, Anvi, I'm probably going to be very boring here. Most of my playlist is like this deep focused meditation music.
That's okay. It's
Super
awesome.
boring, I know.
No way, yeah. Do you guys like reading with music, or do you kind of just like reading as it
Mhm.
is? I don't think it helps me. I feel like I just can't focus with music, but what about you guys?
I think it really depends. Honestly, I don't normally listen to music while I read because normally when I read it's like right before bedtime, so I can kind of like lull myself to sleep, but then I always end up falling asleep with my book on my face. So then that's not fun. But if I want to sort of like romanticize my life, I'll put on a vinyl while I read and then I'll just sort of like do that. What was I listening to last night? Last night I was listening to Born to Die. I was listening to Born to Die by Lana Del Rey, that album on vinyl while I was doing some homework. I wasn't reading. I didn't get to read last night, unfortunately. I was up last night doing my French homework until like 1 in the morning.
Yeah, but that's awesome that we all have like, different things that, are vibing. Yeah, so if anything else wants to be added, or, we can just end it here. And Emily's last episode officially, which is a
Yeah,
big deal. It's been a
yeah.
year,
I'm
Emily.
It's been a year, if you can believe it.
Wow. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Well,
Let's let's see if
Emily,
I have any. I guess my final words would be thank you guys so much for watching. I've really enjoyed my journey with all of you, and this podcast has truly been very insightful, honestly, is like the main adjective I'd use, largely because we've had such a wide variety of guests, and I feel like everyone has sort of had something that's resonated with me. I think that's sort of part of like um what happens when you have like a podcast and like when you have like or when you interview people, I think you sort of take something away from everyone because everyone has something to teach you at the end of the day. So I think it's been a great experience, and I'm so glad that you guys have come along with us. And I hope that you guys have learned things as well. And I'm very, very grateful to Pooja for sharing her story because I truly feel like I was saying it's very insightful, and I think her truth is very beautiful. And I'm so glad that we could give you one platform to share it. And then also thank you to Unvi because she has been the best co-host ever. And I love, love, love everything that you've done. So yeah,
yeah, and I can't wait to, take over the podcast with Emily's guidance because she's gonna be there, and I'm gonna definitely drag her on some episodes. So this won't be the last of you guys. Yeah, but
no.
any more words, or are we ready to put an end to this chapter?
Just want to
Um,
thank you and Emily and V. Thank you both. You guys rock. I love watching you guys. I've seen some episodes and I love it.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's everything. Thank you guys so much for watching. don't forget to follow us on our socials. And then Anvi, if you want to show Pooja's book cover too, I think that would be pretty great in case anybody wants to read some more or just learn more about her story firsthand.
Yeah, totally. So this is the book, and it is called And Then There Was Jesus. It's a wonderful book. I have annotated the living life out of this book, and it's beautiful. I had a lot of fun reading it. I read it as a freshman in, high school, trying to figure out my own journey. It wasn't necessarily religious, but it was a journey that I wanted to go through, like on my own, and try to figure everything out. So even if you aren't religious, but you're just trying to look for a story about, community, but also just finding a greater good, whether that be within yourself or, in the people around you, then give it a shot. I mean, the worst that you have is a really good read, so might as well try, right? But with all that said and done, thank you everyone for watching, and Emily, any
Oh,
last?
before we go, Pooja, can you tell us where we can find your book as well, just so the audience knows?
Absolutely. You can find it anywhere that books are sold. So in any bookstore, and Amazon has it, Barnes and Noble have it, and also on my website. So, and it's poojachilukuri.com.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode. And next time it will be Unvi doing the intro, like she did today, but it will be Unvi for doing the intro for a while. But thank you guys so much for watching. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. And well, I won't be here next episode, but I know Unvi will look forward to talking with all of you then.